In this video, I will go over the inverse trigonometric function. Before we start dealing with trigonometric function, let's review a little bit of algebra. So I'm going to make an example like f of x is set of point 1 to 5, 3 to 8, and 9 to 4, and 4 to 8. So f of x is a function. 1 went to 5, 3 went to 8, 9 went to 4, and 4 went to 8. If I ask you guys what is the inverse of f of x, you will write f inverse of x will be 5 to 1, 8 to 3, 4 to 9, just change them, and 8 to 4. So now my question is that f inverse is a function? Is that yes, is a function, or no, it's not a function? So the answer is no, because from 8 went to 3 and 8 went to 4. So this function, the inverse of that, is not a function. We also learn, if I give you guys a graph, like this graph, how do we know the inverse of this graph is a function or is not a function? We will make a horizontal line test. If we cross more than 1 point, then the inverse of that is not a function. So here, G inverse is not a function. And if a function that the inverse of that is not function, those type of function are not one-to-one. So with this review, let's see the graph of sine and cosine and tangent. So we're going to apply horizontal line test to see if sine has the inverse of sine or cosine are a function or not. So this is a graph of sine. We make a horizontal line test. So this is a horizontal line test. Definitely cross more than 1 point. So this is not one-to-one, and the inverse of sine is not a function. But if we cut part of the graph, if we cut from negative pi half, we just remove it. Also from pi half, we remove it. Only this part of this graph of sine has an inverse, because the horizontal line cross at 1 point. So we can say that sine inverse of x is a function only if x, the domain here, be between, not x here, only if the value be between negative pi half and pi half. So for example, if I'm going to say y equal to sine of x, then sine inverse of y will be equal to x. Another example for you guys, sine of 45 degree equal to root 2 over 2. If I put this one inside of sine, and this gonna go outside if I add -1 on top of sine. So that means sine inverse of radical 2 over 2 equal to 45 degrees. So back to this function, the sine inverse exists if x be between -π½ and π½ Also the value of y, this value of y gonna be from 1 to -1. Let's look at the graph of cosine. This is a graph of cosine. Horizontal line test, it crosses more than 1 point. We look at from 0 to pi, only this part of the graph, from 0 to pi, the horizontal line test cross at 1 point. So cosine inverse has cosine of x has an inverse, and the inverse is a function from 0 to pi only. So y equal to cosine of x, that means x going to be cosine inverse of y. What do we know about x and y? This x, the output of inverse should be between 0 and pi. So x should be between 0 and pi. And this y has from -1 to +1. Only on this condition cosine has inverse. One example, cosine inverse of 3.5. Anytime you see inverse, you need to remember this property. Cosine has an inverse of a value, that value must be between 1 and -1. In this example, it doesn't exist, so there is no solution. It must be between -1 and 1, and the output, if it's between -1 and 1, and what is output going to be between 0 and pi. Let's look at graph of tangents. If we apply or make a horizontal line test, this will cross more than 1 point, but only on -π½ to +π½ the horizontal line only cross at 1 point. So tangent inverse of x, I don't want to call it x, I'm going to call it y, equal to x. So this x has to be between -π½ and π½ and not equal to, and the value of y will be from -infinity to +infinity. Let's have a few examples. Sine inverse of 2. sine inverse of radical 3 over 2. So you see inverse, you're going to remember, or you're going to review on your note sheet, that if y equal to sine of x, then x will be sine inverse of x. This is true if x is between negative pi half and pi half. So that should be sine of y. X should be between negative pi half to pi half, and y must be from negative 1 to positive 1. So this is my y, but it's more than 1, so that doesn't exist. There's no solution there. In this case, we have sine of radical inverse of radical 3 over 2. This is between 1 and negative 1, and you know the answer is going to be pi over 3. It's 60 degrees. The sine inverse of radical 3 over 2, this is exactly same as arc sine of radical 3 over 2. So some calculator that has a word arc, they're exactly same. They're asking us find the exact value. Sine inverse of x equal to 2 pi. So we need to solve for this x. In order to have x by itself, first we should have sine inverse of x, one side of equal sign, and get rid of the 12. So I'm going to divide by 12. We have sine inverse of x equal to pi over 6. 12 to divide by 12 is 5. We have inverse. So this is exactly as writing sine of pi over 6 equal to x. Because they said find the exact, so you should know that you don't need to use a calculator. This is 1/2. So x going to be equal to 1/2. Let's have another example. Given f of x equal to negative 3 cosine of 4x, and x is between pi over 4 and 0, they're asking us find the f inverse of x. So they're asking us find f inverse. They're not asking us what is cosine inverse, the f inverse. So this function happens to be trigonometric function. In order to find the inverse, we should go through a few steps, same as algebra. The first step, or step 0, we learn instead of f of x, we're going to put y. Y equal to negative 3 cosine of 4x. Then we're going to, instead of x, we're going to put y. Instead of y, we're going to substitute x. So step 1, x equal to negative 3 cosine of 4y. Now we need to solve for y. So our y is inside of cosine. So that means we are dealing with trigonometric function. So we need to have this one side of equal sign first. So I'm going to divide by -3. So step 2, we're going to solve for y. In order to solve for y, I divide by -3. We got cosine of 4y equal to -x/3. In order to have this y by itself, we need to get rid of cosine. And the only way to get rid of cosine, we have to make an inverse of this. So for y, this will be equal to cosine inverse of -x/3. And we divide by 4. You solve for y. So y become 1/4 of cosine inverse of -x/3. And the last step is we need to get rid of y and have f inverse of x.